Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
We are
afternoon.
just waiting a few seconds for people to join, and we will be starting soon. Welcome to the session on food security in Africa, measurement and trends. This is a session organized by the High Commissioner on the Plan from Morocco, and Mr. Said Zurali will give an introduction immediately.
Okay.
Said, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kafiro. At the beginning, I would like to thank all the contributor for organizing this session focusing on the measuring of food security, which constitute a challenge of national statistical system. My thanks to Mr. Cafiero for the time allotted to us and Mrs. Mansouri Amal too. The measuring of security, food security is good.
Good. We
You
can
say
see
that
your we can see your slides, Said. Please.
Okay. This session is organized by High Commission of for Planning, the Office Statistic in Morocco. We have three speakers, Mrs. Mansouri and Mr. Carlo and me. Measure for food security is a big challenge for national statistics system. The approach are multiple and different according to the institution. The objective of this session is to present the approaches of the main institutions working on the theme of food security, as well as to reading according to the interest of the speakers. The presentation of practical cases in some Africa countries. In these cases, constitutes an opportunity for the sharing of knowledge between the participants. My presentation is measuring food security. Donc, measuring food security challenge for national statistic system. Different approach according to the institution. FIU approach and the FPRI approach is different, and the several approach to use for measuring the food security, but it is not unique one only indicator to measure the food security in country. Several organizations are working on food security using specific indicator. However, the national statistic system only partially respond to the approach to be adopted for the assessment of and regular statistic. Moreover, the approach used do not allow the calculation of single indicator of food security. The food security has for a long time been analyzed from the angle of agriculture, production, local food availability, and self-sufficiency. This vision is still permitted and created in many debates in university and research institute, with the consideration of aspect of poverty. The understand of the food security has integrated multi-dimension access, quality, stability. Food security is a definition in World Food Summit of November states that food security is answering all people at all time have economic, social, and physical access to sufficient, safe, and healthy food. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 48, everyone has the right to, please, 1 minute. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 48, everyone has the right to inadequate standard of living, including adequate food. Right to food, a United Nations Special Rapporteur, right to food, right of every human being to feed himself in dignity, whether by production his own food. Food security is one of the major global challenges for humanity and countries. Food security and food sovereignty can be considered and complementary. Food security measuring. Second note. Major challenges for national statistical system. Food security in country in Africa. However, World Organization believe that the statistical system do not always make it possible to assess the level of food security because in the absence of standard indicator, these institutions do not adopt the same approaches or the same indicator that reflect the level of food security in global scale. These institutions assess the level of food security in the world according to different approaches. Some are direct, rapid, multidimensional. Other approach is inversal, monitor the nutritional level of the population. Example, fees. And other have desired down or up of few indicator. Example for this note is FPRI, Organization of the United Nations of Food and Agriculture, approach of FAO, direct measurement of the food security. The measurement of food security by FAO is most often described in 4 dimensions: economic, social, durability, laxity, exploitation, and disponibility. We take into account both supply and demand. It relies on the food availability food access, food utilization, and sustainability. World food security service led to the identification of 30 indicators measuring another approach fees. This model which different from traditional approach. Mr. Cafiro is specialist special in this approach fees. This model, which different from traditional approaches, was implemented within the framework of the project Voices of the Hungry, the Global Forum on Food Security and Nutrition, and another approach of the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI. IFPRI conducted study to assess the state of food security at the national level in 175 countries. This study resulted in classification system following an approach that included 5 categories. Donc, last food security group, weak food security, middle food security, and top food security and high food security group. Other food security indicator sample food security assessment. Another typology was used by Brisinger, FPRI, to classify country according to the level of food security. It only used 2 main indicators to measure food security: total exports in relation to food import and food production per capita. 3 categories country: low food and security, moderated food and security, and cut food and security. And another indicator is the global hungry index. Is tools designated to measuring and track hunger globally, regional and national in the fight against hunger. World Food, another PAM, World Food Program. The World Food Program offers a manual of the assessment of food security in emergency. Its purpose is to measuring the repercussion of shock on the food security of households and community in affected area. Another approach proposed jointly by OCDE and FAO and Economic Social Espoir for West Asia, and proposal on the approach. The cross-reading different approaches of measuring food security show the difference in the following aspect: the absence of single indicator, the food security level analysis is evaluation by several according to the approaches, the target population, the choice of type of indicator, and the variability of data and their frequency and data source. The development of a global and specific indicator meets the criteria of SMART to measuring the level of food security is of great importance in given country. In this context, it is assumed that the level of food security is acceptable in the population of country, is not in any situation of food in quantity and quality and at all time. In addition, it is important to remember that hundreds of variables will have to integrated in this case. Contribution of local production, level of import of food production, deficit and capacity for substitution. Donc, measurement of food security is easy by matrix composed of submatrix dealing with the different aspects. Is a function, population, economy, social, and sustainable, and another variable. Question limited measuring the food security. Bon, in data relating to the following aspect, there has significant population growth and economic growth that are both respectful speeds. The limit of food production substitute the scarcity of natural resources, the economic capacity to answer import of food production, and another limited measuring the food security. In conclusion, analysis of approach used to assess the level of food security through the examination of indicators relating to its various aspects and dimensions in context characterized by numerous temporal crises, including the combined COVID-19 and drought. Example in Morocco, this situation in Morocco. However, in other countries, national statistical systems have several challenges in the future in order to assess the level of food security. In fact, in addition, the lack of statistics specific to certain aspects of food security to inform decision makers. The statistical system of country, in particular in development country, example Africa country, it's recommended to strengthen scientific research and coordination between the different producers of national statistics to calculate the indicator requested by the different bodies to build single composite indicator to assess food security and nutrition, and to enrich the statistical system through new approach and specific survey. Thank you, and excuse me for my language English. It's not very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Said, and especially for the effort of making your presentation and the slides in English. I want to tell everybody that the presentation is also available in French, and Said might be able to address questions also in French if you feel so. And I apologize for the lack of organization. This is the first time we are doing this in a virtual manner. So we are facing some difficulties, but hopefully we will be able to nevertheless have a fruitful discussion. I understand that we were expecting also 2 other interventions that unfortunately have not materialized. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to Ms. Mansouri for her illustration. And then I will make my own presentation, which is sort of a rejoinder and an opening for the discussion on the main point that we might want to tackle on. Ms. Mansouri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carlo. Hello, everybody. I am Amal Mansouri, a statistician in High Commission for Planning, Morocco. I'm very glad to be with you in this first World Statistical Congress. Thank you for being here. So today I'm going to talk to you, as you know, about food security. Before I start, let me just ask one important question, which is, did you know how many deaths were caused until now by coronavirus in the world? Some of you, I think, the answer, but it is about or more than 4 million persons who were dead because of coronavirus. It is scary, but what is even more terrible, it is that we have more deaths because of hunger. Because every minute we have about 11 persons who died because of hunger. For coronavirus, we have until now about 7 persons who died because of coronavirus. This is terrible. So how we can end and how we can reduce hunger? This is the most relevant question. We can, of course, use a vaccine to reduce death caused by coronavirus. But what we can do to end or to reduce death caused by hunger? To answer of this question, some relevant remarks to answer to this question is first to improve or to implement the strategy to increase or to improve food security, especially in countries which suffer from hunger. Second, we can develop a system of reliable data which capture aspect or dimension of food, food security or food insecurity. And 3, we have to develop capacity to analyze, to have a consolidated view of different aspects of hunger, of food insecurity. So moving to the next point, and before I start to talk about the methods using to calculate composite indicators, let me just underline the definition of security or food security, which is the first step in calculating composite indicators. Food security, as is defined by Summit or by FO, exists when all people at all the time have physical and economic access to sufficient and safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary need and food preference for an active and healthy life. So for this definition, we can capture four dimensions, which we know, which are availability, access, use or utilization, and stability. This is the four aspects of food dimension as defined by FAO. This indicator or this dimension couldn't give, if we focus on one of this dimension, couldn't give a picture or a complete picture of food security. So we need several indicators to capture the four dimensions of food security. Now we to how we can capture, how we can use it in defining composite indicator. We have, first of all, identified relevant or selecting the most reliable variables, treat these variables or data process, and the third, aggregated and weighting. And last, benchmark this indicator, composite indicator, with others. The methods which are used for this in this area are we can use principal component analysis, we can use a factor analysis, we can use also simple or the same weight indicator to have a composite indicator of food security, or to have a complete picture of food security. We can apply, or when we apply these three methods for 17 developing countries, which are most in Africa, using 5 selected variables, which are availability of food produced, these variables are produced by FAO, which are availability of food that capture availability, the first dimension of food security, GDP per capita to capture access and use of food security, and stability and variability of availability of food, which those variables which catch the last dimension of definition that we gave, or that FAO defined food security. So by applying this approach, what we can have, we find four relevant remarks. First, that a composite indicator of food security, which are calculated by factor analysis or by the same weight aggregation, highlight the same trend of food security situation for the selected countries. Second, we have, if we compare this indicator, this composite indicator, to the undernourishment indicator, which is published by FAO, we find an interesting correlation, which is about 0.74, which is an interesting correlation. That is because we have in undernourishment indicator some aspects which are related with the availability of production, which is the third or the last most relevant result by this application. We find that availability of food is a key variable which is correlated to all indicators that we calculate. The last remark is that we find that all countries improve their food situation, and we have an increase of food security in the majority of these developing countries, despite drought. except for Nigeria, which have a negative trend. And so by this by calculating this indicator, we can notice that if we want, or if we project to strengthen or to improve food security of this country, of African countries especially, we have to implement strategy to improve the availability of supply in this country, especially with this health crisis, which proved or which disturbed all supply chains, especially food supply chains. This is why local production must be boosted and monitored for all this country. We can also say, to summarize, that if we want to end hunger, to reduce deaths caused by hunger, I think that it will be relevant that each country could assess its own food security, their truth, and monitor its performance against their truth. Hunger must be fought like poverty, exactly with the same approach that we adopt to end poverty. We have to monitor this area or this issue by specifying or identifying their tools by country and measure the performance of this country comparing to this their tool. Finally, I think I thank you so much for attending, and please feel free to ask any question in developing this area. Thank you to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mansouri. And so I think we will move now to my short summary and discussion opener of what I think could be important issues to be tackled in these very important areas both presenters before me have highlighted. And some of you have seen in the chat room, Said has already announced that the presentation of the results that Ms. Mansouri has illustrated will be made available upon request, and we all look forward to see the result. But let me just share my screen now, and let's go over just a few overview of relevant issues. And I wanted to just give some motivation for why it was important and why I was so glad of having been invited to participate in a session on food security in Africa. And this is linked to an announcement that I want to make. And then I will quickly go over some discussion on the evolution of the concept and assessment methods, describing what, in my opinion, is the current status, especially focusing on statistics that are based on population level data, and then humbly suggests what might be a few next urgent steps in this area. So the announcement I want to make is that for a lucky, but somehow unfortunate for me, a combination of events today, which means just immediately 1 hour after this session, we will be launching the 2021 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World. And so we will be presenting the most recent assessment that FAO, WFP, IFAD, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization together make every year of what is the situation of food security and nutrition in the world. And this year, the focus will be on recognizing how the organization of food system is failing to provide people with sufficient food, but especially also to make sure that everybody can afford a healthy diet. And so for those of you who can, today there will be the official launch of the new edition. And what really attracted me was that in this report, we will be noticing again the sad truth that the situation in Africa is projected to worsen in the near future unless very bold actions are taken. And so how statistics, data, and information can contribute to that? I think it's already clear from the previous conversation the kind of multiplicity of definitions, approach, and focus area that have been attached to food security over the year. This is a quote from a very nice book of 2007. At that time, the author, John Shaw, noted how the concept of food security has evolved. And we could describe it as going from cereal self-sufficiency up to the 70s, and with the first oil crisis, the attention was of getting enough wheat, rice for everyone to eat. Today, we speak of sustainable diets for all, sustainable healthy diets for all, meaning that now the attention is no longer on just providing enough calories for everyone, but we want to provide healthy food that are affordable and that are produced in sustainable ways, meaning that they will protect the natural resource. Water scarcity is becoming a very large concern. Now, in this context, however, there is still persisting confusion of many terms, because on one hand, the definition of food security is nice, comprehensive, and ambitious. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. But the moment in which we want to go from such a definition to a quantitative empirical assessment, that definition is of very little guidance, because we need to give operational definition to many terms in order to be able to identify statistical variables that can be reported. And I would like to just be provocative in saying, but even then, even if the fundamental philosophical question of what is it, food security or food insecurity, is answered, there will still be other issues that must be addressed and on which we are still quite far from a general agreement in the world. There are political issues. How relevant is food security compared, for example, to other priorities? Today, we live in the moment in which the world is tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, but people should not forget that, as Ms. Mansouri correctly pointed out, that overall hunger may still be more dangerous and more costly in terms of human life than the pandemic. So everybody should recognize that this is relevant. But the problem is, if I may, sometimes what is relevant is only what politically can be used to bring consensus. Apart from the political decision, there is a related institutional problem. Who should take care of assessing, monitoring, and reporting on food security. And here there are important issues related to the how to preserve the independence of the assessment from possible political pressure, how to make sure that the assessment is reliable, timely, and is not affected by specific interests of partial groups of power in any specific moment. And in this sense, I would solicit people to think about the role of international organization in this sense. But I'm a statistician, and so probably the area where I can offer a little bit more of reflection is on the technical aspect, how to do it. And this is what I will focus on. I won't go into very specific detail, but I will make reference to two publications that are available. One is an article published on the Annals of the New York Academy of Science, and another one is a chapter on measuring food insecurity that is included in an edited book by Professor Cheryl Hendricks from South Africa. And the main issues that we try to address is first, can food security be measured? What is food security? And it's not something as simple as a physical object like land area or even food production. This can be measured. There are quantities that can be observed, data that can be reported, but food security is a complex phenomenon. So is it possible to measure it? And Ms. Mansouri hinted to the possibility of creating composite index. But that is a difficult thing to do because there are essentially an infinite way in which you can combine different variables. And so who is to be deciding what is the most appropriate one? So how can we reach the point of having an agreed upon international standard for measuring food security, to the point that I even question the possibility or the wisdom of trying to get to a single statistical indicator, because no matter how, this will always hide some information, because if you reduce information of several dimensions into a single metric, it might be used for a specific ranking purpose, but it will lose the ability to inform policy. And so the question is, how can we make sure that we don't compromise the possibility of producing timely, reliable, comparable data and assessment methods? And the last 40 years have seen a proliferation of proposal, variables, indicators, metrics, but without a strong support of definitions and sound methodology. If we focus in Africa, for example, today, I started listing how many different initiatives are going on. And we go from the SDG Global Monitoring Framework, the CADEP process at the African Union, then the integrated food security phase classification that is applied in several countries, especially in Eastern and Southern Africa. The cadre harmonisé, which is a similar initiative that is coordinated by the SEALs countries in the Sahel region. In Southern Africa, the SADC coordinated the vulnerability assessment. Initiative like the Global Agricultural Food Security Program that funds investment in agricultural and food security have their own food security monitoring. Feed the Future is another similar initiative. Recently, we have a bunch of COVID-19 related monitoring initiative. We also include food security consideration. So you see, there is perhaps too many of these assessments, but with two persisting problems. And this is my personal opinion as somebody that works in this area every day. And I can still see that there is clearly still a lack of institutional coordination between, on one hand, the entities that produce data, and on the other hand, the analyst might benefit from looking at the data and trying to distill the information. Often the data that are collected are made available for analysis only after considerable delay. And this means taking away much of the usefulness of the data, because the data is more actionable the more timely analyzed it is. The second very important problem is that there are still different analytic frameworks and even sometimes different data collection that may coexist in the same country. Different agencies, different units collect data that are supposed to get to the same problem. And this is a waste of resources that with more coordination could be avoided. And also from the communication point of view, this may be problematic. Let me just report an example that we directly as FAO, we are the custodian agency for indicators in the SDG monitoring framework. When we consulted countries, either requesting data or validating the estimate of one of the indicators, the SDG 212, representatives from several institutions have responded offering assessment based, for example, on the IPC, and therefore not recognizing the consistency that we need to have with methods at international level. Now, in this publication, which I was mentioning, you will find a table in which I tried to list just part of the different indicators that have been used to evaluate the ability of people to access food. And you see that there is a list. And for the list of indicators, I ventured into giving some evaluation on validity, reliability, comparability, but also timeliness, ease of application, and what purpose the indicators can. And so you see that there is still no clear evidence of one indicator that might serve all this purpose. And recently, actually, one success has been the possibility of including the possibility of using the FIS, this was mentioned by Said, also within emergency assessment. So, and I am concluding. If I had to say what are the most urgent problems to be addressed, before getting into specific technicality of one indicator of the other, we need still to have a shared understanding and recognizing of the complex natures of the many connections that exist between the food system and the rest of the economy and the society. Because if we don't do this, we will be likely producing assessments that are not useful from a policy point of view. Second, I think, and I strongly believe this is important, especially for the African continent, we need to finally overcome the distinction between humanitarian and development intervention. And this needs an effort to harmonize the conceptual frameworks, the institutional setting behind the intervention, and the monitoring and evaluation effort. Third, equally important, there is still large need for capacity development of all actors at all levels of the chain that goes from data generation all the way to policy making. Because this is a complex, difficult phenomenon which requires some sophisticated knowledge, which are still not very common among all those who need to use this information. Finally, we need to increase the coordination. There are still too many actors that work in isolation, that work in silos, that for specific purpose they would invest in collecting the data, analyzing and making their own assessment without sharing their result. And so the need for harmonization, which I recognize was also present in the commentary made by the High Commission in Morocco, is very, very important. We need to really give meaning to the word harmonization because we are still far away from it. In this sense, there are some solutions. We as FAO are continuing working to try to, for example, reinforce national ownership of existing high-level international initiatives. There is an SDG monitoring framework that has been agreed upon with the participation of all countries represented in the Statistical Commission. So there is no need for adding creative national indicator frameworks with different solutions compared to what already exists in the SDG framework. And so we need to align as much as possible existing national frameworks and special initiatives like the IPC, for example, with standard indicators and tools, so that the interoperability of food security data is improved. And in this sense, we are working with partners to, for example, coordinating the processing and analysis of food consumption data that is collected in household surveys for both poverty and food security indicator, food security assessment. So statistical office, people that work with household survey should not work separately when doing poverty analysis or when doing food security analysis. The same data can inform both. Another very important success was I already mentioned is that we finally have been able to include the FIES among the indicators that can be used for IPC or cadre harmonisé analysis. This means that data collected to inform the SDG monitoring can also be used to inform more frequent emergency assessment. And finally, of course, to do this, we need to mobilize resources to be able to provide capacity development and technical support. And with that, I stop and thank you, everybody, for the attention. And over to you, Said. I think we have just a few minutes for questions, answers, and yeah, I think we only have 3 minutes, and then the next session will start. But yes, if I may, we remain available to be contacted.
One question for you, Mr. Kafir. Thank you for your presentation. I have one question for you, Mr. Kafir. What percentage of country respond to the statistics system. You send me?
What percentage of countries respond to the statistics system?
Yes, in food security. If you send the question, if you reserve the statistic country, what is the percentage of country to respond for your need, besoin?
Well, I think, as I said, we struggle as FAO to produce the state of food security and nutrition every year, updating on the number of countries that on which we can report the statistics. And this has been increasing quite substantially in the last few years, especially because of the push created by the SDG monitoring framework. So I'm not pessimistic. We are still not far away from having a very complete and harmonized set of methods and data from all countries. But as everyone can look on FAOStat, we have a very large number on which we can report statistics. The road is still far, as you know perfectly well from our interaction, and others also know. There is need to make a combined effort of trying to agree on giving up some creativity to have a very specific monitoring framework for one country, trying to coordinate and agree on general methodology that can be applied everywhere. Today, for example, SDG 212, which is the indicator based on FIES, we report on more than 100 countries, meaning that we either have our own FAO data or based on data collected by the countries, and thanks to the collaboration, reporting according to the international standard. And so we are actually covering the majority of the countries. In Africa, we are still lagging behind. That is true, and that's why I think the focus of this session was so important. Okay. Is there any other burning question? But I'm Said, I'm concerned also that our time for this session is expired, and so people might need to move to the next round of session. But let me confirm to everyone that the recording of the session will be available, and we remain available by email to respond any question. So I encourage everyone to send along questions to the organizer, Said Zurali, to myself, Carlo Cafiero @fao.org. And with that, I thank you everyone for your participation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and your contribution in this session. And thank you for your time allotted to this session. And thank you for Mrs. Mansouri for a good presentation. Notre revoir. Voilà.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to attend with you in this session, all of you, and especially with you, Mr. Said and Mr. Carlo. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.